So Gary, one of the things that we're struggling with constantly here is the fact that our income isn't keeping up with our outgo. And many of our people tell me they're tithers, and yet I know that our income doesn't really match that situation. So why isn't tithing a suitable way to fund our ministries any longer?
When we base our organization's well-being on a funding model that has tithing as its foundation, tithing to where you're spiritually fed, we create an organization that is hypersensitive to whether or not people feel spiritually fed. And so we become driven in no uncertain terms to make sure that those who are supporting our church are happy. And so the context of our funding model is dependent upon the well-being of the people and their perception that they're being fed or that things are working as they should. But whenever there is any sense of insufficiency or not enough, we all become modulated. And so when the church is running short on funds and needs to fundraise or ask for additional support, it moves people unconsciously into their own kind of default way with being with any sense of not enough. And so it becomes a challenge. And right now our decline is being felt in the sense that we have declining attendance and therefore declining funds. And if we still try to do fundraising and teach prosperity classes in the context of tithing to fund our organizations, we are literally making our funding model our mission. I mean, think about that for a moment. When we have our tithing, practice of tithing as our funding model, in which all New Thought churches have for the most part, we inadvertently, when there's not enough, make funding the organization our purpose. And if you think about all the things that we have to do to fund our organization that has nothing to do with, say, transforming lives or inspiring people to make a positive difference in our world, then the whole organization and the community's culture becomes conditioned to manage its survival, and that becomes its purpose. And it's a short-lived purpose because survival in the context of our old ministry practice has an expiration date. So what if we were to differentiate the practice of tithing from the funding dimension of the church? So that we don't want to say, we have to abolish tithing. No, we have to uncouple it from our funding concept. And we want to teach people to tithe as source. We want to teach tithing as a spiritual practice that is used not to fund the church, but rather to teach people that they can make a difference in their world. And as we begin to understand that, as we teach tithing not as a funding principle, but as a principle for actualizing a person's capacity to make a difference, there's a different context. But now we still have to fund the organization. So if we uncouple from tithing as our kind of way in which we receive our funds, and therefore and then ostensibly make our purpose about funding the organizations, if we can instead think in terms of like what we've been talking about on the video forums. Margie Hyatt coined the term spiritual cooperative. You, David, coined the term cooperative share. We're developing a whole new narrative with respect to supporting and funding the organization as a spiritual cooperative, where the values of ownership and partnership become the context for us maturing into, as grown-up adults, into owning what we're trying to create together, as opposed to become reliance upon the tradition of our 400-year-old minister-centric ministry practice and all the unintended consequences associated with that paradigm. So just to kind of wrap up this initial response to your question, I feel an urgency that we in the New Thought movement must uncouple ourselves from the practice of tithing as our funding model. I'm not suggesting that we abandon teaching tithing, but until we teach it as a practice in which unleashes our capacity as individuals to make a difference, as opposed to looking outside of ourselves for evidence of our worth and well-being, and placing the condition upon whether or not we're going to feel okay or be in ownership based upon whether or not our life is working for us. It doesn't work like that, at least not anymore. We have to be willing to step into owning something that we want to co-create together, and we have to fund it independent of whether or not we feel spiritually fed. We have to fund it in the context of whether or not this is a worthwhile endeavor to have more of, so that more and more people can experience what we're trying to create together.
How do you enroll them in the co-op? How do you make it of value to them so that they want to go there?
Okay, so that's a good question, because here comes in the integral membership system. Because you have to have a systematic way of bringing people into an integrity, an intentional relationship that has explicit what we count on our community members and our governing members for. And so there's nothing wrong with sharing what is counted on, and for people to be invited to say yes. And so when we have, as a part of our system, opportunities that regularly place before the community information that gives them a chance to reevaluate their sense of ownership or their financial relationship to the church, it's a systematic way for us to begin to see that we can build into our ministry practice increases into our operational income by virtue of inviting new people who are wanting to become community members, to say yes to meeting or exceeding that cooperative share. And if they can't, just simply tell us what we can count on and make it automatic. And so far, that's a reasonable request, and we have had no pushback at all. So in other words, when the integral membership system is a part of the ongoing practice, we take in community members every other month. And every other month, those who participate in our community member orientation process are invited into saying yes to what we count on them for as community members. And then when those who are eligible to become governing members, when they step into their process, they also are counted on to say yes to other things that also include greater dimensions of ownership. And the other aspect of that is, of course, the board effectively partnering with the community so that there is a real sense that we're in this together, that the board is not a separate, siloed entity that works independent and therefore detached from the community, but that the community feels that the board is their liaison to a sustainable and healthy organization. So.